Syafira and I'm from business management. This video purpose is for community service and we'll be talking about communication in the workplace. So please enjoy. Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about how to build good communication skill in the workplace. Communication is something we do every day, but when we enter a professional environment, the way we communicate becomes much more important. Research has shown that communication skills are not only related to how we interact with other people, but they can also influence teamwork and employee performance. And I personally experienced this during my internship. I realized that being able to communicate clearly was just as important as knowing how to actually do the job. So, in this presentation, I will be discussing some key communication skills that we can develop and how we can apply them in our everyday workplace. So, why do communication skills matter? According to the research by Wulandari and Burgess, trust plays an important role in the workplace communication and employee satisfaction. Their study, which involved 168 employees in the Indonesian oil industry, examined the relationship between trust, communication quality, and employee satisfaction. They show that communication is not simply about exchanging information, it also plays a role in the building relationship and trust within the workplace. And I can definitely relate this to my internship experience. As a reservation intern, I had to communicate not only with guests but also with supervisor, managers, coworker, or other department. For example, when handling a reservation or guest request, the information sometimes needed to be passed on the other department. So, if the information wasn't communicated clearly, it could affect the next step of the process. That's when I realized that communication is not just about delivering information, but it's also about making sure that the information is understood and can actually be acted upon. Now let's move on to three pillars of our workplace communication. First, we have active listening. Active listening means we are not simply waiting for our turn to speak. We actually pay attention, understand the context, and ask questions when something isn't clear. During my internship, this became really important when receiving instruction from my senior or my managers. Sometimes an instruction could sound simple, but there could be additional details that I didn't immediately catch. So, as an intern, I learned that asking questions such as, "Could you explain more about this part?" or "Could you clarify this more? I didn't quite catch it," is much better than simply assuming that I understand everything. The second pillar is clear expression. In the workplace, especially in the operational environment, our message needs to be clear and concise. We need to communicate what the issue is, what information we already have, and what action is needed. And finally, being professional. In the professional environment doesn't necessarily mean sounding extremely formal all the time. It's more about understanding our audience and adjusting our communication accordingly. So, for me, these three pillars can basically be summarized as listen carefully, communicate clearly, and know your audience. Now, let's take a look at some practical communication tips. The first one is asking clarifying questions. This is probably one of the biggest lessons I learned during my first experience. Sometimes, as an intern, we might feel hesitant to ask because the questions sound dumb or too basic. But I've learned that asking one question early can prevent a much bigger problem later. So it's always better ask in the beginning. The second is summarizing key points. After receiving an instruction or having a discussion, especially when there are several things involved, summarizing the important points help make sure everyone has the same level of understanding. For example, we can simply say that I want to confirm that I will do the A first, then I will do the B, and then I will do the C. After I'm done with all of that, I will update you soon. That's such a sample for summarizing the key points of discussion. The third one is choosing the appropriate communication channels. Not every issue needs a meeting, and not every issue can be solved through a quick chat. Research on workplace communication has also shown that the way employees respond to work communication can affect collaborative performance. So, communication is not simply about responding quickly, but also about responding in a way that fits the situation. From my own experience, sometimes a quick message was enough for a simple update, while more a complicated issue required a clear explanation and direct discussion. So the goal is not just about communicating more, but how to communicate appropriately. Now let's compare an effective and ineffective communication. Effective communication builds trust, clarity, and collaboration, while poor communication can lead to misunderstanding and missed goal. And honestly, this became very real to me during my first internship. Working in reservation means that information can move from one person to department to another very quickly. For example, if there's a special guest request, the information needs to be communicated clearly so the relevant department knows what needs to be prepared. If we assume that someone else already knows what it is about, or we leave out such an important detail, the information can easily get lost somewhere along the way. One of the biggest lessons I personally learned during my internship is that the importance of over communicating rather than under communicating. Of course, over communicating doesn't mean sending unnecessary message every day, all day. It means that I try to making sure that the important information is communicated clearly enough that the next person doesn't have to guess what we meant. So I think this is especially important for new employee because we are still learning how the organization works. It's always better to clarify and communicate early than to wait until a small misunderstanding become much a bigger problem. What are the actual benefits of good communication? First, it's better teamwork. When everyone understands their responsibility and has access to the same information, they need to collaborate become much more easier. The second is clarity. Clear communication can reduce unnecessary back and forth and help prevent mistakes. And the third is career growth, which is some research conduct among employees in the Medan office found that communication skills significantly influence teamwork, and communication skills also had a positive relationship with employee performance through teamwork. So, communication skills aren't just soft skill that looks good on the CV. They can actually support how we work with others and how effectively we perform our responsibility. And from my first experience in the internship, I realized that even as an intern, people don't only see me whether I can do the job, they also see me how whether I ask question or whether I communicate issue early or do I respond appropriately and how do I coordinate with the people. And to summarize, there are a few key takeaways that we can apply from day one. First, listen carefully. Don't just hear what people say, make sure you understand the context. Second, speak clearly. Especially in the professional environment, make sure your message is easy to understand for everyone. The third is ask thoughtful question. Asking for clarification doesn't make us look incapable or stupid. Instead, it shows that we can care about doing the job correctly. We also need to adapt our tone to our audience, and the way we communicate with our friends is obviously different with how we communicate with our managers or the guests. And lastly is finally embrace the feedback. During my internship, I received quite a lot of feedback from my seniors since I'm not from the hospitality background. And at first it felt weird, but I realized that feedback is one of the fastest way to understand that we need to improve. So good communication isn't just about being perfect, but it's about how we listen, clarify, and communicate, and eventually how to improve. And finally, that brings me to the end of my presentation. If there's one thing I personally learned from this topic and from my own experience, is that good communication is not simply about talking more, it's about making sure that the right information reach the right person in the right way and at the right time. And as a new employee, we might still be learning how the technical aspect of our job, and that's completely normal. If we can communicate properly, ask when we are feel unsure, listen to the feedback, and keep everyone aligned, I believe it become much more easier for us to learn, adapt, and grow in the workplace. And if you feel doubt, please don't hesitate to communicate to the other people. So I think that's all for me for this topic. Thank you for watching. I will see you when I see you.